There we go. Okay, thanks so much. It's great to be here. Thank you all that have come this morning. Thank you, obviously, to Blue Meteoriitti. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I should mention that I have 3 colleagues with me. I have Sirpa and Petri from our Helsinki office, and they're right there. They'll stick around for the entire morning, and Malin from our Stockholm office. So, my name is Adam Blomberg, and I'm Director of Content and Product Marketing at Episerver. And the topic of today is the future of CMS and online publishing. And at the conclusion of this presentation, I will argue that we probably shouldn't call this a CMS, but I'll get to that. Okay, so how do customers, consumers, and business buyers go through the process of actually acquiring a product or a service? Well, so you have probably seen many different versions of this marketing and sales funnel, and I thought this one was somewhat new. But so you have all these different stages, from awareness to interest to desire to actually completing the purchase. And for quite some time in marketing, in sales, you have been able to reach those customers and sort of affect their behavior through advertising, through other means in business-to-business scenarios, for instance. Sales have often been involved fairly early on, and you have been sort of driving the customer through this process. Well, now, so as some of you, or even all of you, have noticed, this is no longer the case. So what we're looking at today is something more akin to this. So obviously the customer go through all these different stages. The only difference is that they don't tell you about it. So you probably can't reach out to them and affect them in the same way you used to. So nowadays, the customers might have already done all the research when they come to you to make that purchase. And we see this in many different places. If you look at retail, for instance, you see that foot traffic in stores is way down. In just 5 years, I think it's almost half. But sales are still increasing. So people are making that research. They're not just making it in your stores. And same thing for business to business. So, and this obviously poses a challenge to many organizations. And another way to look at this is through this tool. And by the way, this is a really great tool. So if you haven't checked it out, please do so. It's from Google. So you can see how different interactions are laid out throughout the customer journey. And what you see here, you can select different segments, different markets, and for these medium-sized businesses in shopping in the US, you see that probably the first interaction the customer have, again, maybe not with you, is through social and through organic search. We see here display advertising, but typically this isn't the way things have worked in the past. So that's the difference, and that affects how we work with digital marketing and the tools that we need in order to succeed. Some of you might have seen Scott Galloway. I think he was here a few weeks ago. And he talked about the death of the advertising complex, and I won't do that. But this is an interesting point. So he says that the fastest growing brands don't advertise. And he has a number of different data points for this. This is one. So these are 2 cosmetic brands. And what you see is that with NYX, they typically rank better in Google. They appear more often in the first page of search results. But at the same time, they just spend that tiny amount on purchasing keywords, whereas L'Oreal spends a fortune on buying the same keyword. So obviously something has changed and something is different. It's no longer a given that if you just spend enough money on advertising, you will succeed. And so how do organizations like yours handle this? Well, through content, oftentimes. And this is a really clever way to do this. And the idea is to provide something of value, something that would be helpful in that research process, for instance. It could also be around building a community and connections about the brand. And by doing that, you can actually reach customers at an earlier stage. So just let me give you 2 examples. We will hear more about this later on with more hands-on tips on how you can do this. So first one is Byggmax. So the idea here is that even before I would consider going to, for instance, to Byggmax to buy lumber, I'm thinking about something that I would like to do, and in this case, it's building a porch. And so the first question is probably, I mean, how do I do this? Can I do it myself? What do I need in order to do this? And they've actually done this really well. So they explain for many different projects how you can go about completing them. And obviously at the end, you can very easily purchase the things that you need. But the real benefit is established already up there, where they create this trust and this credibility with you as a customer. Another example, which is actually pretty interesting. So some of you might think that, well, so content marketing is only for commercial businesses. Well, no. So this is fairly small municipality in Sweden, close to Gothenburg, and they saw that they had a challenge reaching the residents of Kungälv with different kinds of information. If they had projects going on, people weren't really involved in the decisions they were making. So what they did was they hired a few people that had formerly worked at a large TV network in Sweden, TV4, to actually build a video team in-house. So now what they have is something that they call Kungälv Play, where they have all these different videos, and they produce at least one, but probably a few a day. So it's a really rapid pace they're working at, and they've seen a tremendous engagement with these videos. So it's not only for businesses, it's for government agencies, municipalities. It works for many different verticals. Okay, so if we for a moment take a step back and think about this content. So what is it in content that make it work, and why is it useful in order to reach customers at an earlier stage? Well, so essentially what we're doing with content is, to a large extent, is to provide some kind of utility for people. They have a problem, they have a question, It's something that they need help with. And we then can provide that kind of help. And I think it's really useful to look at this as a service instead of just plain content, because it helps us think about what's the benefit of this to my customer. And I will give you a few examples of how thinking about services can actually help us work with this, and how it actually directly affects the way that we build software and services to support you. So the first one, and this is really getting old, people talking about Uber in presentations, but this, I won't talk about cabs or anything, but rather about an entirely new service that they soon will begin offering, which is city guides. So a difference between your sort of average cab and an Uber is that your cab driver probably knows a few good restaurants and can give a few recommendations, whereas the average Uber driver, in my experience, can't. So they saw that this is an opportunity to provide an additional level of service to their customers. And what they will do is they will launch these city guides where you can have that same experience, get those recommendations, but do it through the app in a different way than you could do before. So that's a good example of, I mean, essentially it's content, yes, but it is about providing this service to riders. So also a well-known brand, Apple, but maybe a less well-known example. So for many years, one of the great things about being an Apple user was the community around the product. So if you ever had a question or a problem, you could ask. I mean, you could ask at this user community that Apple provides, or you can ask anyone that uses a Mac, essentially. And people would be really helpful and glad to help you. So in this case, this too, you could argue, is content, but it's also about providing connections between consumers, between customers of your product. And again, I think this is a service because it helps people actually solve problems or answer questions that they might have. Finally, one of our customers is the city of Stockholm, and they're actually great at services. They have probably roughly 100 of them. One is to pay for your parking fee. And again, I would probably not argue that this is content, but still, it's a service and something that you probably would want to do. Or, I mean, obviously it's an app, so it's digital. So this is also in the landscape that you're working in. If you look inside the organization, on an intranet, for instance, finding a colleague that works on a specific project or knows about something, also, I'd argue, a service. Someone with a need, and you can provide a utility. And finally, if we circle back and think about this product purchase, how can we help out there? Well, so one thing is to actually be helpful in the decision-making process and give people much more in-depth information about the products that they are considering, and maybe even letting other consumers rate your products and tell you how they fit, for instance, which is sort of helping the consumer along in their purchase path. And so all of these different services, how can you sum that up? Well, so we'll say that the future is that you will author, you will market, you will sell, and you will design for utility. And I think that's It might seem like a subtle change, but I think it's a big change in the way you think about these things. Technically, what would that mean? Well, so you need to be able to blend information with interactivity, and you make also probably needs to make it individualized. So it's tailored to whoever you're talking to. And finally, and maybe this is actually the biggest change. So all of you communicators, marketers, and web editors, you will slowly become, if you aren't already, service designers. So you will think about this utility and the entire experience. And obviously you need the tools to be able to do that effectively. And now if we look at how that has already affected us and the way we think about the Episerver platform, I will give you 3 different examples. So first one, this is just to sort of frame the discussion. This is my broadband provider, and in this case I'm actually logged into their site, and I'm at this page where I can select between different TV packages, and the first thing they ask me is for my address, which they surely should have. Also, I see all these different packages. I see cable TV, for instance, even though I don't have cable, but rather fiber. And to be able to see what I actually can get, I need to go to this other, much more obscure page, and also more boring, where I probably can make those purchases. So I think this is sort of a typical problem. You have information in different places, and oftentimes you have the product content, the product information in one place, and my information and then my ability to take action in a different place. And I think that's not a good way to design a service. So this is actually a paradigm shift. So for many years, I'm sure many of you have been used to doing this. You have a CMS, most likely, where you can work on information. You can write excellent content. Maybe you can provide a few additional links and those things. But you haven't really been able to design it as a service, and you haven't been able to sort of change things the way that you present them and sort of bring different utilities together. So that's a big change. This is the way that you will design services going forward. And I think we're not, I mean, we still have work to do in order to achieve the full vision, but I think we're actually getting fairly close. So what you can do here is, I mean, obviously you will still have contents of different kinds, but then you can have different kinds of interactivity. One of the decisions we made a number of years ago was actually to integrate a complete e-commerce platform into the CMS, which was then largely unheard of because it was 2 different systems. And the reason for that is because we think that it's the same experience, it's the same service, so you should be able to design it in one place. Also, what we're going to see now is that the system can actually help you make this individual. So if you have this piece of content, perhaps this might not be the same for every visitor. I will talk more about that in just a minute. Right now, actually. So this thing about personalization, I'm sure some or even many of you have been using it to some extent in the tools and platforms that you currently use. And typically how it has worked is that you have a set of rules, and maybe you show one piece of content to people from one part of the country, or if they're logged in, maybe you know their gender, so you can show different kind of information based on that. Well, so that's useful, and you certainly can do that, but there's obviously limitations. And one of them is that maybe you make a number of assumptions and maybe not all of them are true. And also just the sheer work required to create and manage all those rules. And what we see is that if you have these, maybe there are not millions, but still thousands of different people and with different needs. And you also have a lot of different items. It might be products, it might be messages, it might be news articles. And you're trying to, I mean, the problem is essentially of matching these to those. And what we see is that if you don't target them selectively, you have a success rate that's less, actually way less than 1%. So you need to do some kind of targeting. And the way we think about this, so if we think about our platform, and most others, to be honest, a few years back, it typically looked like this. So all these blue things are things like that you, the editor or the marketer or the service designer have to do yourself manually. So most of the things in the CMS you had to do manually. I mean, you have to publish information, you have to manage it, you need to create all those personalization rules if you want to do that. And maybe there was a little bit of sort of intelligence that the system could help you with. But the change here that we see is that as technology progresses, as behavior change, we will see the system actually doing more of the work for you. And these are just a few different examples. One of the examples that you probably already have seen is this example of product recommendations, where we have in the platform a way that the platform actually learns from behavior, and there's some machine intelligence in there to actually decide what kind of products you would recommend. And the interesting things with these things is that we see that they perform much better than a human would. So many customers, many organizations might be a little bit hesitant. Should we rely on the system to make these decisions? Surely, I mean, we know our customers better. We can do a more informed decision. But what we see is that the machine actually outperforms the human with a factor of we roughly see a revenue increase of 6 to 7% when you apply this technology for e-commerce. But this is absolutely not limited to e-commerce. It will be super important also for content. And the final thing, and I think I'm working on overtime here, I think that UX, the interface that you all use, will be even more important. And so this is just to give a brief example of two systems that I use almost daily. So this is actually, I'm doing exactly the same thing in these two systems. I'm performing a search query. And this is one way to do it, and this is another. And for a long time, I think that people have seen this. So, I mean, yes, this looks much better. Surely it would be nice to have a system like this, but we're actually beginning to see it change. So even analysts look at this as a success factor for all different kinds of software, that it should be easy to use and also actually pleasant to use. And I think this will also be a success factor if you're going to be able to design those different services. And we have a secret weapon here. This is my colleague, Chris McCann. And I think he has probably spent more time out with our customers than in the office. But that's a good thing, because only by not only understanding our customers, but also realizing, what is the environment that you're all working in. We can make products that look like the product and work like the product to the right instead of the product to the left. And I think that will be hugely important for any software platform going forward. And this is the only slide of me bragging. So Siteworks actually did an evaluation comparing Episerver to another leading WCM platform. And they looked at how quickly you can complete different tasks. And obviously, just the speed of completion isn't giving the whole picture. But what you can see is that this focus on UX and usability actually pays off, if anyone didn't already know that. So just to sum up, we think that you will design experiences and pages in a completely different way in order to create these different services. You will be able to individualize without those rules and letting the machine do that for you. UX matters to everyone, not only your customers, but also to you. And actually, I haven't mentioned it because I think it's fairly obvious. And probably in a year from now, I won't mention it. This software will run in the cloud, and it already does for many of our customers. But I think that will be the new standard just in a year or two. So that's my short talk about the future of CMS. And as I mentioned, I don't think it will be called a CMS. Maybe it's a service design platform. And obviously, I would really enjoy having some of you on board on this ride and on this change of these platforms. And just to show what we're talking about, we have a video with Suntu on our website, so please go check that out if you like to. All right, thank you all. Again, my colleagues are here, and they will be here during the entire morning, and they can answer questions in Finnish too. Thank you.